Welcome to the Zoe Routh Leadership Podcast, where we explore the future and what this means for your leadership. We ask the big questions. What's happening on the horizon? What does this mean for us? And most importantly, what skills do I need now for leadership of the future? It's time to explore. Let's go.
Well, hello there. Welcome back to the show. It's Zoe Routh, and this is the Zoe Routh Leadership Podcast. I think you knew that already. And I am your friendly Canadian-Australian leadership futurist, award-winning novelist, and somebody who is really amazed about all the things that are happening around the planet right now. On Planet Human, we have the woolly mammoth. Yes, there is a group that is trying to revive the woolly mammoth, not like through CPR, but basically save it from extinct. Well, it is extinct. Bring it back from extinction. That's what they're trying to do. The organization is called Colossal. And the woolly mammoth used to roam around 4,000 years ago, so a while ago now. And Colossal is doing some DNA stuff. Basically, they've learned how to scrape elephant skin and create stem cells from that skin. And what they're trying to do is then plug in the woolly mammoth DNA into that to create basically a stem cell that could then generate a woolly mammoth. Why? Why? Why do you want to bring back the woolly mammoth? There's so many problems that could arise from that. The woolly mammoth had a very different context. 4,000 years ago, the world was very different. If we bring back the woolly mammoth, how will this affect the landscape? And there are some sci-fi books that have explored this. What happens when we bring back extinct species into a new context? Guess what? Things run amok because things evolve. And even with human intervention, we don't always anticipate the unintended consequences. So yeah, bit wary about that. Alongside of that particular article was the extrapolation of, could a current elephant gestate the stem cells of the woolly mammoth? And they figured probably not. So, let's create artificial wombs. And this artificial wombs were created some time ago. I think the first one came out for birthing a healthy lamb in 2017, which if you've seen the picture of it, it's kind of weird. It's this see-through plastic thing with some fluid in it to simulate the womb and the uterus. And there's a little lamb there that's undeveloped. Well, guess what? They're trying to get set up to run human trials for human artificial wombs. Yep, this is something out of freaky dystopian sci-fi novel. Think Aldous Huxley around that. Creepy and perhaps useful. So if you have a premature baby and your womb can't support a child, an artificial womb may allow you to gestate that child to full birth, which would be better than having the child die. Right? We think so. And yet, if we take these concepts and run them down a track, as we do in sci-fi novels, to take these ideas and say, what if we had universal access to artificial wombs? Millions of women who couldn't have babies could then potentially have babies, which would be good for them individually. Is it good for the planet? Is it good for the species? What would this mean for us? These types of questions keep me up at night and keep me writing novels. Speaking of novels, on Planet Zoe, yes, Olympus Rising, book 3 in the Gaia series is still with the editor. I should be getting it back soon and diving into the next round of edits. So when will this book be ready? End of the year. It just takes so long to go through the editing process. And yet I'm super excited for it. The whole series is feeling really good. So I'm starting to get little ideas for the final book, which will be the one after Olympus Rising, the book number 4 in the series. And that'll be the last full-length novel. I've got some 2 novellas I might crank out as well. But in the meantime, I have my next nonfiction book on the boil as well, currently titled Power Games. And I think it's going to be hugely impactful and useful for CEOs and teams and senior executives to think about how we need to reframe power in our organizations so that we can better leverage the brilliant capabilities of people around us and stop playing power games. Okay. Other opportunities for you on Planet Zoe. We are going to launch very soon. It might even be next week. Open the doors to my new program, Grace Under Fire, which we will run in September. It's how to exercise power without losing your soul so that you can be seen, heard, and valued, hone your power and get promoted. And we'll be looking at how to get visible, develop your voice, and expand your vision. The page is up there so you can have a look at all the detail for the program. You can put your name down for early notice and therefore early bird pricing. And the seats will be limited. So if you want to on board with that and get into some really powerful conversations about how we're going to reframe and remake power, join the movement and get on that. The link to sign up is for the advance notice is can't get my prepositions correct. Is it a conjunction? Anyway, can't get my words right. The link is in the show notes. Okay. Phew. Made it through. My question for you this week is, how can we be more creative together? This is about creativity and collaboration smashing together in the workplace as they hope to do. And being creative in the workplace is an absolute must. So creativity and collaboration are hallmarks of fit for the future leaders. You need to be across this stuff. My guest today is none other than Amy Clymer. She is an experiential educator. We have a same background from Outward Bound, though she's based in the US. And she is a creativity specialist and just a fabulous human. Just love this interview, love this conversation, and I can't wait for her book to come out. She's also a TEDx speaker, and in her bio is a link to her TEDx talk, which you can have a look. Okay, so how can we be more creative together? That's the question for us today. Amy Clymer is my guest. Let's do it. All the way from Asheville, North Carolina, welcome to the show, the fabulous Dr. Amy Clymer.
Thank you, Zoe. It's so good to be here.
Yes, it is. And we have so much in common. So we both have Outward Bound backgrounds. We both love the outdoors. And where you diverge and get into amazing stuff, which I want to explore today, is this whole idea of notion of creativity and leadership. So how did you get started in this line of work?
So I feel like for me, it's just been like a few things merging together, like now a little later in my life. When I was 16 in high school, I went on an Outward Bound course, which was probably the first time I saw like very intentional facilitation. And so this course, if people aren't familiar, it was a 16-day backpacking, rock climbing, whitewater canoeing, very intense, the hardest thing I'd done physically at that age of my life. And but this facilitation piece is really interesting. And then I've always been very curious about creativity. I remember even having conversations about it as a kid. And I was the person that would get really mad at my friends if they said they weren't creative. I'm like, yes, you are. Don't say that, you know. And eventually, when I got into college, I learned how to facilitate. I took some non-credit classes around facilitation, and I started leading backpacking, rock climbing, canoeing trips. And the creativity thing was just kind of there, but not top of mind. And then after college, I stumbled upon some books about creativity. One in particular is called The Artist's Way, which is, millions of people have read. But it was really transformative for me at the time to think that, oh, wait a minute, like I can be really intentional about creativity and get better at it. And so eventually I started merging those two. I really focused initially more on facilitation and developing teams and leadership development. And then over time I saw like, oh, I could bring this creativity piece in because a lot of teams and a lot of leaders need it, but they haven't thought much about it and they don't know how to do it. And so that's what I'm doing today. That's the short version.
Okay. I love it. First of all, I want to unpack a little bit about your experience in facilitation as a 16-year-old. So you said it was the first time you've experienced or seen or witnessed facilitation on a program. What do you mean by that? Like, what was unique or special or different about that experience?
I mean, I guess at that point, obviously I'd been in school where it was more, a teacher teaching to a group of students sitting, kind of more classic traditional lecture base. I mean, not all the teachers were like that, but, and I'd also been really involved in soccer and I'd taken art classes as a kid. So I'd had these experiences as kind of like a student in various contexts. But this was the first time where I felt like there was an adult who was leading a group of students to have an experience where like the students were actually leading the experience. And we were, taught how to do various things, how to cook, how to set up our tarps, how to, hang our food in the tree so it didn't get mauled by bears in the middle of the night. We were taught how to do all these things. And eventually it was like, hey, you students, you're in charge. You have the skills now. But it also wasn't just like, oh, we're turning you loose, like, do whatever you need to do. There was also time for reflection where in the evenings, we would circle up and like, hey, how did the day go? What could we do better? And that was really interesting to me, like this opportunity to reflect on the experience and actually talk about it with each other. And I saw how powerful that was and how it helped us work better together. It helped me individually just like be more comfortable and confident with who I was. Yeah, so I think that's kind of what I mean by facilitation, if that makes sense.
It totally does. And thank you for sharing that little insight. So zipping ahead to the idea of bringing creativity into leadership and teams, how is it, or why? So let's start with the why. Why is it that leaders and teams don't think about creativity?
I don't think it's unique to leaders and teams. I think that we just collectively aren't thinking a lot about it. Although I will say, I think we're doing a better job. We're talking more about creativity and innovation than we were 15 years ago. And so I'm seeing like this really positive shift that people are thinking about it and talking about it more. However, I think it's still this like nebulous thing where leaders and teams are like, oh yeah, we need to be creative. Yep. And then that's like the end of the conversation. They don't really know what to do next. Or, I think, we sort of sometimes make fun of like the companies are like, oh, we're going to bring in a ping pong table and then everyone's going to be more creative. It's like, well, okay, there's a little more to it than that. And then I also think creativity can sometimes get a bad rap because of things like the ping pong tables where leaders think like, oh, that's just fluffy. Or maybe they've been a part of a brainstorming session where like these wild, wacky ideas come up that don't actually lead to anything. So I think that one, it's like collectively we're not thinking a whole lot about it, but then two, sometimes leaders and team members have had bad experiences that just make them think like, no, I don't want to have anything to do with that. We don't need to bother with that.
So the conversation around innovation, and I'm wondering if creativity is an adjunct to that or a subdot, that's coming more into play now. Why do you think that is?
Oh gosh, I think there's so many reasons for it. I think that one is just the way our society is, where information can just be spread so much quicker than it could be 15 years ago. I mean, even things like this podcast, right? Like, I think podcasts barely existed 15 years ago, if they did at all. And so there's just more opportunity for us to spread ideas. Even organizations like TED, like that's their whole idea, ideas we're spreading. And so I think that's part of it. I think the other piece is that the research around creativity has exponentially grown. And there was actually this moment in 1950 where there was this call from the American Psychological Association that said, hey, we need more research on creativity. And, as these things happen, there was like kind of a slow but eventually exponential growth where now we understand it so much better than we did, 10, 15, 20 years ago. And as leaders, we can take that research and take that learning and apply it to, the work. That was part of what I did for my dissertation. Was I studied creativity in teams and looked at like, okay, well, what are the elements teams need if they want to be creative together? And so I think things like, people like me and others who are able to build on that is really helping us all understand how creativity works better.
So on your dissertation, you studied elements that you need as teams to be creative together. What are those elements?
Yeah, so there's three things.
Yep.
And two of them in particular, my guess is like you've had other guests talk about them. So the first is team purpose. So if a team wants to be creative together, they want to innovate together, they need to understand, they need to have a clear shared team purpose. Pretty obvious, and a lot of teams are really good at that. So the second one is they need to have strong team dynamics. So they need to trust each other. They need to be able to communicate well. They need to be able to engage in some conflict. So you don't want to avoid conflict altogether, but still have some. You also don't want to always be playing devil's advocate because that's not helpful either. But there's like this happy medium that's called creative abrasion, which I love that term. So that's team conflict. So team purpose, team purpose, team dynamics. And then the third one, which is the one that most teams struggle with, is teams need to know and use a creative process. So there's actually a process for how we can be creative together. And when all the team members know it and they understand it, then they can apply it and put it to work.
So let's talk about that. Is there a singular creative process or are there multiple ones? So as I'm thinking about this creative process, do you mean using an activity kind of thing? Is that the process or is there a meta process?
I guess if we're thinking of an activity, then I would say it's a meta process. So as far as is there only one? I would say kind of not. Some examples of creative processes that listeners may have heard of: design thinking, human-centered design, creative problem solving, synectics, TRIZ. There's all these out there. But if you lay them on, each of them have multiple stages, 4 to 6 stages. And if you lay them all out, they're more or less all the same. So some of them have broken a stage down into 2 parts or 3 parts or clumped them together, but they're basically more or less the same. And they follow our natural inclinations as humans. So the way that they've come about is by looking at how do humans, those who are particularly creative, what are they doing? And then we've just basically codified it. And so within the one that I teach the most is called creative problem solving, and there's 4 stages to it. And within those stages, there's multiple activities and different techniques you can use. I would say maybe a parallel that some leaders might be familiar with is project management. You can get a degree in project management and there's all these elements to it. Is similar. Creative problem solving, I think, is similar from kind of a very high level, does that make sense?
Yeah, it totally does. So in creative problem solving, you need a problem to start with?
More or less, yeah. Usually that's not too hard to find. I feel that's sort of the purpose of most teams is you're essentially solving problems all day long. And you can look at a really small problem. You could look at a big problem. It could be something that, we could figure this out in a couple days. It might be something that will never be solved in your lifetime, but you could work towards. But yeah, you do need something that you're working towards.
So that would be one of the first steps, is to identify the problem.
Absolutely. Yeah. The first step is called clarify. And clarify is about really understanding what the problem is or what you're trying to achieve. And this is a stage that I've noticed a lot of people want to skip. I have been guilty of this because I'm not a strong clarifier. I've had to train myself to get better at this. But if we don't spend the time clarifying, then what happens is we just jump right in and we try to solve the problem. And a lot of the times we solve the wrong problem. We implement something and then nothing actually changes. And so clarifying is let me just make sure I understand what's going on for the people involved and what are different perspectives? How are other people approaching this? So that's the clarify stage.
Okay. And then what's the next stage?
So the next stage is ideate. So generating ideas. So at the end of the clarify stage, hopefully you have clarity around what the real issue is. And then you start generating ideas. The classic brainstorming is a technique for generating ideas, but there are dozens, if not hundreds, of different techniques you can use. And I really try to push the teams that I work with to generate lots of ideas. We're not talking 3 to 5 ideas. We're talking dozens, maybe hundreds of ideas, depending on the problem and the scale of it.
Okay, cool. So I'm wondering, so that's sort of divergent thinking. Is step 3 convergent thinking where you're narrowing them down?
Well, not sort of. So in each of the stages, so clarify and ideate, and then the other 2 are develop and implement, which we can get into. each stage, there's a piece of it where you're diverging and, you're thinking big and broad and all these different perspectives, and then you're converging before you move to the next stage. So within that ideate stage, you're generating lots of ideas, but then before you move on, you're narrowing in on like, okay, what are the best ideas for this situation?
Okay. And then develop is, all right, so we've picked one or two or three, and we're going to flesh it out and sort of imagine how that idea might be executed. Is that the idea?
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay.
And, some people love doing this. Some people get really into the develop stage, and then some people are just like, oh my gosh, why are we talking? Let's just get started. And this is the value of having a diverse team involved, is that the people who are that love to develop, they can kind of lead that part and make sure that it actually happens. But yeah, you want to develop that stage, and then develop the ideas, and then finally you're implementing them. And that implementation could be prototypes. It could be like a pilot. I generally encourage teams like start at a small scale, like just test this out to see if it works. And then the whole process is a cycle. So then you're testing it, you're prototyping it, whatever, and then you're starting over again at clarify if needed.
Okay, awesome. Well, this all sounds very logical as opposed to creative. So I'm wondering, what are some myths that might be hanging around creativity?
I think one of the biggest myths is that that there even is a process. Like, most people have no idea that there's a creative process, including people who are considered creatives, like the marketing department or the graphic design department. Often they have no idea that there is actually a creative process. So that in itself, I think, is one of the big myths. Another myth that I talk about often is that creativity is a skill. And so it's a skill that we can learn, that we can get better at, we can, build our chops around. And I think there's a great parallel between creativity and leadership. Like, in the 1950s, there was maybe not a lot of conversation about developing leaders. It's like, oh, well, this person's just naturally a good leader. And now we understand that's junk, and that you can develop leaders, and creativity is the exact same thing. Like, yep, we can develop creativity through training and through reflection and through practice. It's the same idea.
So one of the enduring associations for me around creativity is that it's about producing art, either written art or visual art or musical art. That's an element of it. Is that something that gets in the way of people embracing creativity at work, do you think?
Yeah, I think so. I think that's a great point, that it is a myth. And that's like one of the things that I talk about frequently in my trainings or my keynotes, is that art is a skill, creativity is a skill, and sometimes those overlap. But you can be a highly creative person and think of the word draw as a 4-letter word. Like, you just, no way, I can't draw at all. And that's fine. They're not the same thing. And I do think we end up confusing the two. And really, creativity, even from the art perspective, it's just about coming up with new ideas. The definition that I use is creativity is novelty that is valuable.
Okay,
so
let me just write that down. That was really good. Creativity is novelty.
Creativity is novelty that is valuable.
That is valuable. Yeah, okay.
I know, there's sort of a lot in those 6 little words.
There is a lot in that, yeah. Yeah, so I think the novelty thing is an interesting element to that statement, as is valuable. So let's unpack the novelty component. So if we are doing creative problem solving, why is novelty important there? Is that just because it's something new that we haven't tried before? Or tell me a little bit more about that.
Yeah, I mean, so novelty meaning, new, different, unique, original. We don't use the word novelty very often, which is sometimes why I like to use it. But yes, I also should add, I don't think we need to be creative all the time. Every time there's a problem, we don't need to apply creativity. So if you are looking at being creative, hopefully there's some reason for it. Your computer breaks, maybe you don't need to be that creative. You just need to take it to a technician to get their input. But creativity is like, okay, we do need something new, original, for whatever reason. So yeah, that's the novelty piece.
Okay. And then valuable, creativity is novelty that is valuable. How do we ascertain if it's valuable or not?
And that's the big question, right? Like, valuable to who? And I think this is where there's so much, judgment and social judgment around creativity. Like, a lot of times I'll ask, like, in the middle of a keynote, I'll say, raise your hand if you think you're creative. And depending on the group, I'll say, with the exception of maybe a very small group, I've never had everyone raise their hand. What's cool is that over the last 15 years, more and more people are raising their hand because they understand creativity better. But I think part of why people don't raise their hand is this social judgment aspect of it. Of like, well, I don't know, I was told I wasn't creative. And so I think that valuable piece, it just depends on the context. Like, I might do something just in the privacy of my home that is novel and it's valuable to me. I'm not necessarily showing it to anybody, but that's creative in itself because it satisfies those requirements. Now, out in the world, it might not necessarily be creative. And so, yeah, we can get deep into this if we wanted, but I think the main point is it just depends. It depends on the context.
Okay, I'll take that. I wanted to explore also the notion of volume and creativity, or productivity and creativity. And so you said earlier that you encourage your clients to come up with dozens, if not hundreds of ideas. And I think that's where people get challenged also. They want to go for 1 to 3 ideas and think that they're done. How is the volume aspect of generating ideas useful for coming up with valuable ideas?
Okay, so a couple points here. One is that it doesn't take a lot of time. It takes way less time than you would imagine. So let's imagine there's a team of 10 people. Very realistic that in 30 minutes we could come up with 100 ideas. Easy. Now, are all those ideas good? No, of course not. And part of the reason for coming up with so many ideas is that quantity leads to quality. And so it's unlikely that the first 5 ideas that a team comes up with are the best ideas. And actually, the more you can push and the further you get, the more likely you are to get unique, original, novel ideas that are a good fit. Or, maybe it's idea 3 and idea 12. Those get combined and that leads to idea number 20. And you would never have gotten there had you not gone through all of them. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, I do that. So I think the connectivity piece is also an important element to consider. And I use your Clymer cards all the time for that reason.
Oh, nice.
So
I love it.
For those who haven't come across Amy's Clymer cards, they are a deck of cards with images on them and prompters, and I use them as a debriefing or framing tool. So I lay out all the cards and get people to pick a card as an example to represent how they are thinking about the day. And so it allows them to latch onto an image through metaphor that explains or gives insight into their thinking and feeling. And it's an element of connectivity. It's like that image sparks associations, which sparks new insight. Can you speak a little bit to the connections or connectivity aspect of creativity?
Yeah, actually, so one of the techniques that I use in ideation. So first of all, when I'm leading an ideation session, we use multiple techniques. And so the first technique is almost always just like, whatever ideas you have in your head, let's get them down on paper. Let's just do a quick brain dump. And then inevitably people start running out of ideas. And so often I'll bring in the Clymer cards and lay those images out and ask them to look at the images and think about the problem that you're trying to solve and what ideas do those images spark. So, for instance, there's like a telephone, an octopus, there's a giraffe, there's a cactus. And so all of these images might spark new ideas. And it could be something very literal, like, oh, we need to get, they look at the telephone, we need to get on the telephone and talk to, and call these people. Or it could be something way more metaphoric around like making connections or communication, or even, maybe just the color red of the phone sparks an idea. It doesn't really matter, but they're making connections to new things that then lead to new ideas that they wouldn't have thought of otherwise.
Okay. I like that. I love that about creativity and connections also, and how the brain works in this web-like way. I think it's super, super cool. Okay.
It is cool.
So if people still feel blocked by creativity, even though we've expanded or expounded how it's about problem solving, there's a process to it, and that all of us have the capability of mining our own brains and those of others for ideas. What are some other blocks that people might have around creativity, and what can they do about it?
I think another big block that people have, especially in the workplace, is this continual drive for production. And, I've got 647 emails I need to get through. I don't have time to sit down and be creative. So in some cases, I think it's a matter of prioritization. And I also think, some of the clients I work with, I ask them questions and I quickly realize they're not using any automation tools or any tools that are going to help them be more productive and maybe manage those emails better or manage whatever tasks they have better. So I do think that, when teams and organizations can tap into, especially some of the technology available today, and let's use that. Geez, now it's so inexpensive, sometimes even free. So I think using that can really help get past that bogged down feeling of oh my gosh, I'm so busy, I can't be creative. But one of the things I've also seen with my clients is I don't teach productivity, and I know we both know many people who do, but one of the things I've seen is that just when they start to learn, this doesn't have to take a lot of time. I mean, 10 minutes in a meeting on, to intentionally do some ideation might be enough time to look at a problem differently or solve something in a new way. And especially once they learn the process. So I think that can help them get past that block of just feeling bogged down with all their other stuff.
How are you using, if you are using generative AI, ChatGPT or any of the other ones, as part of or in a companion to the creative process?
I have been getting into ChatGPT lately, and it's so fascinating because what I have found is that basically ChatGPT in a lot of cases is just a really impressive search engine that is allowing me to do searches that I have wanted to do on, Google or whoever. And that search engine isn't built that way. So here's an example. So I'm writing this book, and there was this research study that I wanted to cite. I couldn't remember the author, the year, the journal, but I could remember some details of the study. And so I of course, I go to Google, nothing. And so I go to ChatGPT and I just describe the details of the study. And I said, please find me this study with the correct source. Boom. 1 second later, I have this study that has just saved me a ton of time in trying to dig this up. So I think, maybe that's more of a productivity example, but I have tried using ChatGPT to generate ideas. For instance, I was trying to name something, a product, and, I put the description in and I asked it for all these names. It was okay. It wasn't I didn't end up using any of the ideas. And I was like, great, thanks for that 15. Give me another 15. Give me another 15. I kept pushing it and it was okay. It wasn't great. But it did spark some ideas for me. So I think what's cool about ChatGPT is it's just a matter of starting to think in this new way of okay, how could I use this to help me? Which for me, I know I'm still learning that and grappling with that. And it's kind of exciting.
Yeah, I find I use it as a brainstorming tool as well as a research tool from time to time as well. And keep drilling down. There's a few little tips too. If you're doing 15 ideas, you can go, can you give me 15 unusual ideas?
Oh yeah, that's good.
And that forces it to go differently. So for example, I was like, look, working on podcasting, developing my podcast strategy. So it gave me 15 ideas to do that. And I said, well, can you give me 15 unusual ways to do that? And it got more in-depth, more nuanced answers to that. So yeah, I think it's a tool. Yeah, we're developing our skills in using the tool. That's for sure. And I think it can smash together different ideas pretty quickly that can go often beyond our own knowledge base. That's one of the restrictions of our own brains. We don't necessarily have like in-depth. For example, if I wanted to smash together Vikings and astronauts, I may not have an in-depth knowledge of either of those things, but ChatGPT can access that and can smash them together in ways I wouldn't necessarily have done. So I think there's an opportunity there for creativity. And I love using DALL-E and Midjourney also for creative imagery and just giving a prompt and see what comes back. That's pretty cool too.
Did you find, if I could ask you a question,
Yeah.
like when you were writing your fiction books, which I know you've been doing lately, did you find you were using them to help smash some ideas together using ChatGPT?
Yeah. So often I'll go to ChatGPT going, I have a plot problem. Like, give me 5 challenges that are going to heighten the conflict between these 2 characters. And
that's so cool.
And I said, describe the scenario. And it gave me, okay, you could have them do this, 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 and this. I'm like, well, I'm going to have them do 3 out of those 5 things. So that was really helpful. Yeah. So I use it for that. Like plotting actually is not my strength. I've discovered in writing novels, it's more character development and description. So that's where I struggle the most. So I can use ChatGPT for that. I also use my human editor for that sort of thing as well. But yeah, it's gotten me out of a few holes. Or if I feel like I don't know where to go with this, I can have a conversation with Chat and it can spark new ideas. I've also tried getting it to write some segments for me. So giving it enough background about characters and situations, say, can you write the first draft of that? And it's pretty average.
Yeah.
It's pretty, it doesn't feel right when I read it. It feels very like trashy romance, almost some of the stuff that it comes up with. And I think that's because it's possibly training on a huge volumes of text that is pretty wonky. So taking the text, let's say they've written a paragraph, I'd have to take that, re-edit it and polish it quite a lot for it to feel like it's in my voice.
Yeah, absolutely. That's cool. Oh, I love it though.
Reading back my own stuff that I've written, I know that I feel like it's working well if I feel comfortable reading it. If I'm reading what ChatGPT wrote and I'm like, it's cringy, some of it.
Yeah.
So the
I mean, it
cringiness.
is bad. Yeah. Sometimes I've read something that, people have wrote and I'm like, oh my gosh, this is so obviously written by ChatGPT. It's like, okay, this is not the high use of this product or this tool.
Yeah, it can be a bit cringy. So I think there's a limitation to that, but it's still an interesting tool for sure.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, I've got one more creativity question. What are some mistakes people make with creativity or creative process?
I think, well, and I said this already, but just like not understanding that there's a process and actually just to build on writing, which you're talking about, I think just like the more and more I've got more into creativity and as I've started writing, the whole idea of like writer's block is just kind of a farce, right? And some of the people like, I don't know if you know Stephen Pressfield, The War of Art, and in actually this amazing writing coach that I've been working with, AJ Harper, she wrote a book called Write a Must Read. And, they all talk about like, there is no such thing as writer's block. I mean, yeah, you might get stuck for a short bit, but you just have to sit down and do it. And, if you want to be a writer, you just strap yourself to a chair with your keyboard and you go. And maybe you're just writing junk for a bit, but the brain will eventually start, producing more quality. And I think that for leaders, this idea of writer's block is a great metaphor. It's not about, well, let me just wait until I have a great idea and then get started. It's about, no, actually, let me set aside this time to do this so that I can get a great idea. And so I think for some leaders that, that's switching it around. It's like, we're going to go through this process to get the idea rather than expect that the idea is just going to like come to you one day and you're going to do something about it, because that doesn't actually happen much.
The study that I've done on the flow cycle is really helpful for that. And Stephen Kotler identified the starting phase for flow is actually struggle. That's one of the reasons why people don't get more flow, is because they're not prepared to wade through the struggle phase, which the analogy is the writer's block, right? It's like getting started is like, it's sluggish, and it's like, and you got that little self-doubt voice going on. Will I ever write anything? Will any ideas ever come? This is crap or whatever. And you persist. And the way that from a writing point of view, the way that I've cracked through that the most easily is by reviewing or editing what I've written the day before. So I can get the little dopamine hits of corrections and finding patterns and that kind of stuff. And then all of a sudden, whoosh, you're hooked and in the flow cycle. So I'm curious about your experience of connecting flow to creativity. What have you discovered?
Yeah, 100%. Well, the person who identified flow, his name's Dr. Mihai Csikszentmihalyi. He's actually he recently passed away a couple years ago, but he was a creativity researcher and just an amazing human. I had the opportunity to interview him about a decade ago. Yeah, it was really cool. I met him in person and then got to interview him later. And, he was studying creativity and then sort of stumbled upon flow. And so there is a tight connection. I mean, I almost feel like being in flow is a state of creativity in a way, or maybe vice versa. I don't know, but there is definitely a close connection there. Yeah, just like that flow where, everything falls away. You're just like super focused and you're excited about what you're doing, and you're forgetting time. And that's like a pretty awesome state of creativity. Mm.
And anandamide is one of the biochemicals that comes when you're in the flow cycle. And anandamide helps you make those connections. It's about seeing patterns and making connections. So there's brain chemistry associated with the whole process as well. I think if we overlapped perhaps the flow cycle onto the creative process, that would probably accelerate the whole thing for teams in particular. And if you framed it up front, this is going to feel challenging at first. It's just the struggle phase of flow. Then people can relax a little bit, I think, around it. Otherwise, it just feels like, we're going to grind gears here. It's like, yes, we are going to grind gears, because then we get to the fun stuff where the ideas are coming and flowing and we're riffing off each other. If we're doing a collective creative flow process, which is the fun part. And then you got to wrap it up and celebrate too, which is the later stages of recovery and of the flow cycle. And then you need to take a break, because it's taxing to have all these biochemicals running through your system.
Yeah, absolutely. I love
Amy,
that.
Are you ready for the Fast Five?
I'm ready.
Okay, let's do it. Number 1, what is the future technology that you most want right now?
Okay, so here's what I want. I feel like there are so many times where I want to do something that we have the technology to do, but the technology isn't integrated well. Like I'm driving in the car and I'm just like, what came up in that email? And, could you schedule this on my calendar? Like, could I just talk to my computer, my phone being a massive computer or a tiny computer, and just tell it to do these things, which all exist, but it doesn't talk together in that way. So that's what I want, is like more like high quality integration.
Jarvis, in other words.
Oh, Jarvis.
Oh, Jarvis from like Iron Man, like the Marvel comics. Yeah, it's like Jarvis is like this almost sentient, or he is sentient AI that can do all that. You just say, Jarvis, can you get the coffee going and bring up
yes,
Peggy Sue and all that kind of stuff. Yeah, I want the Jarvis that will organize my life for me. Basically, a virtual butler.
Exactly. Yeah. I like that.
Yeah, I want that too. Okay, number 2, what's the best tip you ever got for leadership?
The best tip I ever got was from a former mentor of mine. His name is Sandy Cohen. And he said, when you're in a situation as a leader and you don't know what to do, just state, explain what's going on and say you don't know what to do. And I use this all the time, like when I'm facilitating, especially if things get heated or there's conflict or there's maybe some toxicity, or if I'm facilitating, say, for instance, an Outward Bound program and things are, becoming a bit of a mess with the group, then I'll sometimes just pause and point out like, hey, this is what I'm noticing. I'm not sure the next best step, and bring the group in. And it can be pretty powerful.
And they go, wait a minute, you're supposed to solve our problems. And they go, no, I'm the facilitator. I'm helping you solve your problems.
Right. Which I do think leaders are more or less facilitators. So
yeah. Oh, yes. It's a very underutilized and underpracticed skill for leaders. I agree. Okay. Number 3, what's one problem in the workplace you'd love to wave a magic wand and have it be fixed right now?
I think it would be amazing if, and I'm struggling, like, is this a workplace or is this like a parenting thing? And I think it's sort of a combination. If we could encourage and help develop people to be their true selves, because when they are, their amazingness comes out. And when they're not, like, that's when toxicity comes in. And when I say be their true selves, it could be, based on identity. It could be personality. It could be interests. I actually know multiple people who, as kids, were very seriously interested in becoming musicians, and their parents like pushed them to be attorneys. And I've always just wondered, like, oh gosh, like, what if they could have been musicians? What if their parents would just like, yeah, let's, I support you. So I think this shows up in the workplace and in parenting.
Oh, yes. The weight of expectations of others is huge. All right. Number 4, thumbs up or down? A leader you want to give a thumbs up to, or a leader you want to give a thumbs down to?
So, okay, I'm going to actually do a thumbs down, and I'm going to intentionally not share any names. But I had this situation recently where I facilitated this program, and honestly, Zoe, I did an awesome job. Like, I was super proud of it. It was a 2-day leadership retreat, and it was a very public situation. It was for city council. And this reporter decided like how she was going to cover this event was by talking about how much money I charged. And I would say that I'm kind of like middle of the road. Like, I'm not like crazy off the chart expensive, but I'm also not, the cheapest facilitator. And it ended up actually not really being a big deal. But what really struck me is, wow, she had this opportunity as a reporter to focus on anything she wanted in this retreat. Like, and so she could have written about something that would really help bring the community together, but instead she chose to write about something that was more divisive. Anyway, no one really ended up caring about it, so it wasn't that divisive, but her intent was to make these jabs. And I was thinking about it a lot, like, wow, this is a reporter, very niche thing, but how often as leaders we have this opportunity of, okay, am I going to be petty and like say something or do something that divides the team or divides the groups that I'm working with or the community that I'm a part of? Or am I going to do something to bring this group together and help build community and connect them better? So I would say thumbs up to the leaders who are doing that, who are building community and connecting.
Wow. You're right. We always have a choice as individuals. Are we dividing or are we connecting? And it's interesting that people make those choices. Cool. All right. Number 5, what is your favorite leadership book or show, podcast show, apart from this one, of course? And you've cited one book, Write a Must Read. Who's the author of that, by the way?
That was AJ Harper. Excellent book. Just came out in 2022, I think. Yeah, if you are at all interested in writing, particularly a nonfiction book, highly recommend this book. It was a game changer for me to read this book. And then I ended up working with AJ, and I don't think I would have written my book. Well, it's not 100% done, but it's getting there. I don't think I would have written it had I not connected with her. But I would say actually my favorite is, and this may be a little bit of a stretch to call it a leadership book, but I have to give a lot of credit to The Artist's Way by Julia Cameron. It's a classic. It's from 1996 or something, but I think that she's just done a ton. She helped me, her book helped me a lot with understanding creativity and how it works.
It is. It's a delightful book. And it's, there's about 5 books that sit on my creative writer's shelf. And that's one of them, as a reminder that it's a process and you need to take care of that part of your world. And your well needs to be replenished in different ways. So yeah, love it. Thank you so much. And that was the Fast 5. The Zoe Routh Leadership Podcast is proudly sponsored by the Amplifiers Academy. It is an online self-paced leadership development program that you can join at any time and progress at your pace. There are very short video lessons, great checklists and resources and recommendations and book summaries, all there to help boost your leadership thinking and abilities. We focus on leading strategy, leading culture, leading change, and leading performance. So if you want a go-to resource that can help boost your strategic abilities immediately, check us out, Amplifiers Academy, on the zoerouth.com website. See you there. Amy, so is there a question I haven't asked yet that you'd love to answer?
Ooh. I don't know. Nothing's coming to mind at the moment. I mean, there's so much more we can talk about. Can I ask you a question?
Go for it.
I'm curious what you just said, that you have these 5 books on creativity on your shelf. What are the other 5 or the other ones besides The Artist's Way?
I got Stephen King's on writing. I've got Pressfield's books. Oh, what are the more recent ones? John Truby's books, Anatomy of a Novel, I think is what the title is. He's got 2 books, John Truby, on Anatomy of a Story or something. And actually those paperbacks were not as useful as the other ones because the print is really small. So I prefer them as ebooks. But those are the ones that I've got sitting there that I remember that sit out for me. So yeah, I've read Stephen King's On Writing a couple of times. Pressfield's book, The War of Art, was just beautifully written. Another one that he wrote recently, I didn't like as much, nowhere near as much. I kind of read it and went, ugh. But War of Art, I thought was fantastic.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, and I've
Julie
read On Writing as well.
Yeah, I'll have to go back and check now and see if there's any other ones that I've missed. But those are the main ones.
I'm putting you on the spot.
Well, now I'm going to go get Write a Must Read by A.J. Harper, that's for sure.
Yeah, it's definitely worth it.
Cool. Awesome. Amy, where can people find out more about you and your work?
Yeah, they can go to climerconsulting.com, and Clymer is spelled Climer. Climerconsulting.com. If you're interested in Clymer cards, you can go to climercards.com and order a deck. Although if you're in Australia, well, you can also email me, but there's a company in Australia that sells them there. They're called Playmeo. And so you can track them down and order a deck through them. But yeah, definitely reach out. You can also find me on LinkedIn, but would love to connect.
Awesome. And yeah, Playmeo is a pretty groovy little store for facilitators. There's lots of little facilitator knickknacks there that you can incorporate into your facilitator process and maybe your creative process as well, which is awesome. Amy, this has been fantastic. Thank you so much for coming on the show. I've loved talking to you. I love your energy. I love your work. I love your stuff on creativity. You're amazing. Thank you.
Well, thank you. I really enjoyed being here. It was a fun conversation.
It was super awesome to speak with Amy. I love her work. I love her energy. I love her Clymer cards. The cards are really useful tools to help with both facilitation and creative thinking, or ideation, if you like, to help build connections you wouldn't possibly have made without the little prompters of, let's say, an octopus, a traffic cone, or even a snail. All right. So takeaway for me are the 4 steps of the creative process. Clarify. And I think that's something I need to do more of when I'm doing strategic thinking for myself, is to clarify what is the issue or what is the problem that we want to really dig into and have a clear understanding of the end game with that. Step 2 is ideate, generate lots and lots and lots and more ideas than you think as part of the ideation process. Do convergent thinking As part of that, develop the ideas that seem most plausible and start small and test quickly and then implement. So clarify, ideate, develop, and implement. In terms of tip of the week, it's more of a reading. I want to read a chapter from Terra Blanca Insurrection, which you can read or listen for free. So read the ebook for free or listen for free when you sign up to Bookish. So if you go to zoerouth.com/bookish, you'll be able to access Terra Blanca Insurrection there. And you can listen to the audiobook version or get the ebook for free. And this is chapter 36, and it's pretty much right into the insurrection piece. Regan walked into the council nest with a swagger. He knew it was cocky, but hell, he was riding high on adrenaline and all charged up. His squad stood around the room, none sitting, blood smeared on some, others wild-eyed, all just as jacked as he was. The energy crackled. "Justice Squad!" He raised a palm along with his voice. They fell quiet. "Report. Sector 1? "Secure," answered a gruff young man with a bloody tree branch in his hand. "Citizen accommodation." All locked down. Another young face. A little pale, that one, thought Regan. I'll have to watch him. A little out of his depth. Regan gave him an encouraging smile. "The docs?" "I've left Tony and Brenda down there. No one coming or going," Marty said. Regan eyed his second in command. Now here was a reliable asset. He had been right to pick him first. "And the comms? Did Delaware get it done?" "Yes, sir." The short, rotund man appeared at the door, and he nudged others out of the way. They made room for him begrudgingly. His belly pulled his shirt into gapes around the buttons. "Good work, Delaware." Regan favored him with a beaming smile. Delaware reddened and pushed his thick-rimmed glasses back on his nose. Delaware had been reluctant to participate until Regan offered him the role as head of Innovation Center once they had things under control. The man had trembled with excitement. "I heard you caught the governor too, Delaware. Is that right?" Yes, sir, I did. She came into the comms tower and I got her with a footstool." He cringed a little at that admission. "I didn't mean to hurt her. I didn't know it was her, actually. I heard the commotion outside and grabbed the footstool for protection. Then she came in and I just swung without thinking." "It's all right, Delaware. Strange things happen in the heat of the moment. You were only defending yourself." Regan clapped him on the back. "Now, fellas, we need to set the stage here. We're going to have a trial of the council, so look sharp. I'm going to check in on the governor, and when she comes to, we'll get the show on the road." He started up the stairs and then turned back. "Gentlemen, today we get justice. Today we set Terra Blanca right again." Regan pumped a fist. His squad, flushed with victory and anticipation, cheered loudly. As he bounded up the stairs, Regan had a satisfying sense of destiny. But it doesn't go according to his plans, that is for sure. So that's a little bit of an insight, an excerpt from Terra Blanca Insurrection, which is the prequel to the entire Olympus series, which I am currently drafting. Olympus Rising, which is the third full-length novel, is with the editor as we speak. So it is in the production phase, which is kind of fun. So coming up next week on the show, a surprise. We've got a new direction for the show. So I've been cogitating on this for some time now, and I'll be ready to share all the details up next week. In the meantime, live with grace, lead in service, and that means live well, lead well.
You've been listening to the Zoe Routh Leadership Podcast. To find out more about leadership of the future or to contact Zoe, go to zoerouth.com.